So I'm seeing 8:25, 26. Okay, let's give folks a couple minutes to jump in. Hey everyone, thanks for joining and thanks for your patience while we wait for everyone to jump into the meeting. We still have many people clicking in. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and get started. Welcome. We are a little crew from HCD and we're here to talk about AB 434. I hope you are in the right place. We also have a number of folks here to answer questions about other HCD business and funding opportunities. So my name is Sasha Hauswald. I am the Assistant Deputy Director for State Financial Assistance. And I am joined by Nur Kausar, Jennifer Seeger, Hector Leyva, and Gina Ferguson. And all of those folks can help me out with the question portion, which will take most of our time together, but I'm going to start off with a very brief presentation about AB 434. And before I do that, I want to see if I can figure out how to, I wonder if folks can raise their hands. I wanted to get kind of a sense for who is in this session. Does anybody see the icon? Oh, look, you can raise your hand. Okay, so I see hand raises. Folks who are developers who typically use HCD programs for funding their projects, if you could raise your hand so I can see how many folks in the room are really familiar with HCD multifamily development programs.
I think we've got about 10 hands raised so far.
I couldn't hear you very well, Nora. I don't know if other people can.
Is that a little better? No?
Nope. In order to raise your hand, you might go to the three dots in the upper right corner of your menu bar if you can't see it on your screen. So I see only a couple of folks raising their hand, but that might just be because people are having trouble finding the button. So I'm not sure how familiar folks are with AB 434, and since we can't seem to communicate, I'm just going to dive in and assume that a lot of folks are new to the topic and that we might also have some people who at least have a little bit of background on AB 434. So just very briefly, I'll let you all know of some upcoming opportunities for funding to make sure that you know what is happening before and simultaneous with the implementation of AB 434. And then I'll dive into the details about what that bill is, what it says, and how we're implementing it. So here we have our near-term upcoming opportunities. We have the Infill Infrastructure Grant Program. That program promotes infill housing by providing financial assistance to capital improvement projects. And those capital improvement projects need to be in a qualifying infill area, or they need to qualify as an infill project. So there are definitions around that for the program. We also have an open NOFA for the VIP program, Veterans Housing and Homeless Prevention Program. That funding opportunity provides funds for veterans housing, multifamily housing for veterans, including a set aside for extremely low income and supportive housing. We have an open NOFA for the Local Housing Trust Fund program, which is a matching fund program that goes to local and regional housing trust funds. So it doesn't go to developers like the other two. CalHome Disaster will be released imminently. That goes to jurisdictions and nonprofits in counties that are impacted by federally declared disasters. So if you're located in one of those counties, you can apply for these funds, and they are primarily for single family development and rehab. There's a focus there on single family, as well as mortgage assistance and technical assistance. Lastly, we have the round 4 MHP NOFA coming out imminently as well. That's our flagship multifamily housing program to promote development and preservation of deeply affordable multifamily rental projects that most developers in the room will be most familiar with. So if you don't know about these opportunities, or you want to learn more about what HCD issues by way of housing development notices of funding availability, you can find these on our website. Here is a image to show you what it looks like and where you can find it here. And with that, I will move straight into talking a little bit about AB 434. The purpose of this bill is to line up our multifamily development programs. And so MHP, VIP, CERNA, TOD, IIG, HHC, all fall under AB 434, and HCD is required to line up the rules, the guidelines for these programs, the NOFA timing so that folks can apply simultaneously to multiple programs, the scoring so that folks are scored according to a unified methodology, and to make sure that those programs are working well together. So in order to do that, we are updating the guidelines for all of these programs, creating a single rating and ranking system, and creating a one-stop application. And we're doing that all by early 2022. So we're on a fast track. Another goal of AB 434 is really to increase equity and efficiency. So we want to make it easier and faster to access our money, right? We want to reduce barriers to those who have less time and less experience in housing development, and just make the process more efficient in terms of dollars and time for everyone. We also want to continue to further our mission in promoting deep affordability across all communities and directing resources to places that have good amenities, like good schools and good transit. The buzzword these days is opportunity areas, right? Places that are designated as being amenity rich and historically have received much less of our resources and less affordable housing development. But we want to do that while also continuing to invest in historically disinvested neighborhoods. Finally, we want to do all of this while acknowledging the historic and ongoing barriers experienced by developers of color and tribal entities that historically have had difficulty applying for and winning competitive NOFA processes. So we want to make sure that we have points and set-asides that provide better access to those historically excluded organizations. So a word about the multifamily housing program NOFA that is coming out. As I mentioned, this is going to be released imminently. It's our round 4 MHP NOFA, and it is being issued according to the 2019 guidelines. And so it's not actually subject to the new MHP guidelines that have just been released for public comment yesterday. It's super exciting that those new updated guidelines are now out for public comment, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But I want to be really clear that the NOFA, the funding opportunity that is out imminently, is going to adhere to the prior guidelines, which is a bit confusing. The only thing that will be different in this coming NOFA is that MHP will allow for 9%. We will have set-asides for emerging developers, BIPOC developers, and tribal entities. We will, according to a memo that will be released also in the next couple of weeks, remove the anti-stacking prohibition that has previously been applied to projects. And this will allow stacking of multiple HCD programs within the same unit. And we also are going to create a small project set aside for folks who do not want to apply to the SIDLAC and TCAC tax credit programs, so that we can take some of those projects out of the pipeline that is growing sort of a backlog for funding and resulting in delayed projects. So here's the MHP implementation broken down a little bit into 3 different steps. We're basically midway through step 1. We've made our initial recommended updates to the MHP guidelines to line up better with SIDLAC and TCAC to improve equity and equitable impacts, and to line up with the rest of our multifamily programs. So those MHP guidelines are now out for public comment, and I urge everyone who has the interest to go to our website and read through the changes that we've made and provide us with your thoughts. The next 45 days is an extended public comment period for those MHP guidelines because they're so important in really determining what we're going to do with the rest of our AB 434 programs. They're in essence no longer just the MHP guidelines, they're the guidelines for all multifamily funding programs. While those are out for public comment, we're also going to get started on updating the rest of our program guidelines that are subject to AB 434, developing threshold criteria for each of those programs, incorporating the policy directives for consistency with MHP, and comprehensively comparing all of the rating and ranking criteria across those programs so that we have a single way of doing that moving forward. Our third step, which is to me the most intimidating, is creating a single application document and single application portal for all of our programs. Subject to AB 434. So one-stop shop for multifamily developers to submit all of their applications simultaneously and with an emphasis on minimum duplicate data entry. Now, this tells you a little bit more about the programs that are subject to AB 434. And the thing that I really want to point out here is that although 6 programs seems like a lot, to wrap your head around, in the near term, some of these programs are going to be running out of funding. And so transit-oriented development and HHC are both going to be out of money by the end of 2021. And so in practical terms, there won't be an application opportunity through our first SUPA-NOFA for those. There's still a question outstanding about whether there will be CERNA funds in that initial NOFA. There may well be. And so we're left with MHP and IIG for certain, and VIP. Additionally, we may be forward funding and providing full funding for projects that come in through this cycle of VIP. We're not yet sure whether we will have any funding available through the first round SUPERNOVA in 2022. So that brings me to the end of my little presentation. I wanted to reserve most of our time for discussion, so I think I'm going to stop sharing. Anybody can ask for me to go back and reproject any slides if you want to refer back to them. Let me get out of here.
Sasha, would you like me to start going down the list of questions we've received so far?
That would be fabulous.
Great. And then we did have a question on whether everyone was muted. I believe you can unmute yourself because we are in meeting mode, but if you do have a question, we do recommend either placing it in the chat or raising your hand, and then we'll call on you in order. Thank you. So I'm going to start putting some of these questions live. The first question, is my assessment correct that you can't be successful for VHHP without local rental assistance commitments like VASH?
Jennifer, do you want to take that one?
I actually wish we had a VIP representative on the line. Let us take that question back. Let me dig into the guidelines real quick, and maybe we'll post it in the chat, but I don't know off the top of my head.
No problem. Thanks for the question, Jessica. We'll get back to you. Question from Kevin at Cal HFA. Can land trusts also apply for LHTF?
The land trust cannot directly apply unless they have a trust fund that they are administering. However, the trust funds may have land trust as an eligible candidate for their funding cycle.
Thank you. A question from Randy. How disability nonprofits apply to make sure there is accessible housing development?
Are you referring to a specific program?
I don't think a specific program was listed, no.
So MHP and Jennifer, maybe help me out here, but I think pretty much all of our programs do have preference points for enhanced accessibility. So we're endeavoring to do better than the minimum, but I don't think there is a preference for specific types of organizations. It's more for projects that have enhanced accessibility.
Great, thank you. And bear with us, I know there's quite a few questions coming in, so we'll try and get through each one in order of when they were received. Next question, what will this mean for No Place Like Home or HCD Home, etc.? Any plans to also align those programs?
Yeah, so that's an excellent question. And we do have a goal of lining up those programs in a phase 2. I think our first goal is to line up what is required statutorily and do it in a way that really works well and seamlessly for applicants. And then we're hoping to take a more holistic look at our programs in 2022 to understand what we might be able to line up with that supernova for the second round supernova.
Great. We've got a question from Denise Went here. Can previously awarded MHP projects now apply for 9% based on the proposed new change?
Previously awarded, now apply for 9%. That is an excellent question.
So I think the way we've done that in the past is that you are required to give up your prior award in advance of your application and then compete based off of your new application for those credits, right? Otherwise, what we've done in the past is we have actually like resized loans previously awarded to accommodate the switch from 4% to 9%. So I think there are different pathways, but I would encourage you to reach out to the program team.
Great, thank you. And we had a request to go back to the implementation steps. Did it end at step 3? Yes, it did, but we can put that slide back up, I think.
Okay, while I do that, why don't you ask the next question so that we don't lose time? It might take me a minute because my technological skills are not superb. Here we go.
No worries. Does 434 do anything to standardizing standard agreements and the award contract process?
Yeah, that's definitely going to be a big part of this, right? Ideally, we hope to get to a situation where we have one standard agreement that would accommodate funds awarded under multiple programs. So we're working through some of that here internally. We've got a little more time on that. So it's something we haven't really dug into yet, but it's definitely on our list of things to tackle. We've also been trying to streamline our internal processes here in terms of getting boilerplates approved much more quickly, having those ready to go and all in line before we even make awards, which would also help to get standard agreements out more quickly. So yes, and it is on our list and to come.
Thanks,
Great.
Jennifer. So should we go back to this question here?
Oh yeah, sure. On the implementation steps, do we end at step 3?
Yes. Oh, well, Supernova development, I guess Supernova implementation really is the final end. So,
But
yeah.
but to Sasha's earlier point too, right? This is to meet the requirements of AB 434. And I think we also want to try and look at some of those other programs, AHSC, No Place Like Home, to kind of bring them in alignment with AB 434 and the underlying kind of guidelines of MHP. So while step 3 and the issuance of the first NOFA under AB 434 is kind of like the end, right? Goal, there will be additional work that we'll be doing to continuously streamline our other programs as well.
Thank you. Will the application for the Supernova still be based in an Excel workbook, or will you develop an online application that is more flexible and easy to use?
I'm intrigued to hear you say that an online portal would be more flexible and easy to use than Excel. So maybe we'll have an offline conversation about that. But our anticipated solution is one that is an online portal. So it wouldn't be an application that you email in, but it would also have large portions that are Excel based. So we're not going to move everything into a cloud-based solution.
Great. How many Supernovas does HCD plan to hold a year?
So I think our plan is 2 per year, but I don't know if we have determined that there will be 2 in the first year. Jennifer, can you? Will be there? There'll be 2 in 2022. You're on mute.
I don't know that we've made that determination yet. I think we were thinking probably an annual NOFA for AB 434, at least in the initial years, to kind of work through some of the new processes and things. Ideally, if we could get to a 2-year NOFA cycle, I think that would be great, kind of similar to what we do right now with MHP. But I think probably the first initial NOFA would be 1 in 2022, perhaps 1 late in 2022, depending on how things go.
Great, thank you. And I just want to make one clarification. I thought we were in meeting mode, but we are actually in webinar mode. So yeah, folks are fully muted except for the panelists. So I apologize for that. And also just a note, we do have ALS moving ongoing here. So please let us know if you're having any trouble seeing that at all. Thank you. Next question. How can the Supernova and future funding be more aligned with the state's Olmstead requirements and statewide transition plan? How do we ensure homes that include people with disabilities who use home and community-based services, HCBS, are developed immediately and in the long term?
So, I mean, I do think that it sort of is an ongoing process for our programs to prioritize and reward accessibility. I think, you know, there is enhanced scoring in the guidelines that are coming out and has been historically for MHP for access to amenities as well as accessible and adaptable units. I'm not sure that we're, you know, to the perfect solution yet. And so I guess that's also a conversation that is ongoing. Jennifer, did you have anything else to add to it? Okay.
No, only to add that I think the public participation process and some of the sessions that we have scheduled there are really great places to kind of dig into these types of questions and issues a little bit deeper too. So I encourage you to continue to raise that issue as we move forward.
Yeah, thank you.
I mean, I mentioned the public comment period for the MHP guidelines, and I can't really emphasize enough how formative we're seeing public comment as being in this round, because it's really, how do I say this? We don't necessarily always think of the perfect solutions, even if we sometimes are aware of the problems. And so we need help from folks who are really creative thinkers and invested in making sure that our programs are equitably serving folks to dig into the details.
Great, thank you. Next question. Will HCD recognize 80% AMI units soon? There is an incredible demand for this level unit in our area.
That is not something that we're anticipating doing through the AB 434 Supernova. We are prioritizing deeper levels of affordability.
Okay, next question. What are your thoughts on SB 679? Would HCD be open to aligning an HCD Supernova with a, sorry, this is an acronym, so I'm just going to spell it out, LACA HSA NOFA?
I need a little bit more context for that one, unless somebody else can knows exactly what this audience member is referring to.
Mehdi, if you can maybe follow up with a little bit more context, and then I'll scroll down and see what you've provided, or if you could drop some more information in the chat, that would be great. Thank you. In the meantime, next question. So will the Supernova allow projects to simply apply with a funding gap to be filled by any of the 434 programs, or will developers need to specify the individual program requests?
This is a hot topic that we are planning on talking with folks about a lot during the public comment period and our anticipated sessions during that public comment period. So I hope that you come. Tentatively, right, what we're thinking is that you can't just come with a gap and not identify which programs you're willing to take, because different programs have different requirements in terms of what the unit does and what your reporting requirements will be. So we can't just assign without any kind of knowledge of the unit mix or what the developer's preferences are. That said, we have heard really clearly that it's tough to have to wade through so many different NOFA and application processes. And if we can minimize layering, that is really desirable. And so we're looking at some kind of hybrid where developers would opt into programs, but maybe they wouldn't have to identify the specific amount per program that they're asking for. And we'll have more conversations about that.
And there will continue to be threshold requirements over and above the threshold requirements in MHP for the various pots of money too. So, you know, a project would have to come in and say, okay, I'm seeking MHP, farm worker, CERNA, and Todd, for example. We'd want to make sure that all those thresholds were met. And then within that unit mix, that gives us some flexibility to kind of figure out what the final stacking will look like. But as Sasha mentioned, I think a lot of this, we really want to have good, robust conversations with you and thinking through kind of logistically how this will work as part of those public participation sessions to come.
Thank you. Okay, next question. This might be a super basic question, but will all future IIG/VHHP be scored according to MHP scoring and therefore the MHP tiebreaker?
Yes, with the caveat that, as Jennifer noted, right, there are additional threshold criteria to being able to receive VIP or IIG funds. But the idea is that the scoring would be much more aligned. And for that reason, taking a look at the proposed scoring and the guidelines and understanding how that would affect VIP projects is something that's really important to do.
It will at a minimum be the MHP scoring, right? So every VIP project will be subject to the point scoring of MHP. Based on kind of the policy objectives of the VIP program, there may be some additional scoring criteria if you're looking to compete for VIP funds, but at a minimum, you would be subject to the MHP scoring and tiebreakers.
Great, thank you. And we did hear back from Mehdi on clarification of his question earlier. SB 679 would create a Los Angeles County Affordable Housing Financing Agency to fund affordable housing in LA County with local revenue sources. We are advocating for the bill, so thinking about how we can align the NOFA with AB 434.
No, I'm sorry, I still lost the question in there, although now I do understand the context.
Oh, the original question. Let me get back to that. The original question was what were our thoughts on this SB 679, and would HCD be open to aligning the HCD supernova with the LA NOFA?
And by alignment, are you thinking alignment in terms of timing and release, or are you thinking alignment in terms of criteria and scoring? There are specific statutory requirements that we have to implement through our scoring criteria. So, you know, to the extent that the LA County NOFA can align with our programs, that would be great, because then it would make it easier for us to stack funds additionally on top of those funds that are coming through the county. In terms of timing, I think that's still an open question.
Great. I'll let you know if Mehdi responds to that. Thank you. In the meantime, we'll keep moving. Is part of the AB 434 and consolidation process goals also looking at speeding up the funding timeline, for example, from application stage to loan closing in order to get people housed? Round one of Home Key is a great example of how to do it.
Yes, I mean, that's not only part of AB 434, but part of our department's ongoing efforts. And I think that they're manifest through AB 434 in terms of some structural changes, right? The way that applicants can apply simultaneously to one NOFA, and so you're not waiting for, something that's going to be released in another 6 months or 8 months or a year in order to complete your funding stack. But internally, we are also making significant strides, as Jennifer kind of alluded to streamlining the standard agreement process, making sure that contracts can get out the door more quickly, and we're making a commitment moving forward that we will issue the standard agreement within 90 days of receiving all complete and accurate documentation. So we'll be issuing the award letter, and then once developers get all of the necessary documentation in for their standard agreement, we have an internal max timeline of 90 days to issue that standard agreement. And so that's one example of the kind of process streamlining that we're aiming to get better all the time. I know this is an issue with a lot of history and is really, really valid. So I don't know if you want to say anything else about streamlining, Jennifer. Okay.
Great. Next question. Could the infill infrastructure grant program guidelines be used as an eligible use for the proposed new $500 million in regional early action planning funds for housing supportive infrastructure?
So I don't know how the proposed REAP funds intersect with IIG, and I can bring that back to the team.
Yeah, and I mean, if I may, since I am currently managing the regional planning grants, the 1.0 version, so we don't know yet how REAP 2.0 is really going to shake out. We haven't gotten final language on this. There will be some specific language as far as how to use the funds for infrastructure improvements. But as far as if there's going to be any language on alignment with other programs, that we don't know yet, but stay tuned. Next question, does 811 fall under AB 434?
No?
Great. Let's see, just to further clarify, is the Supernova funding the tax credit gaps for the backlog of CIDLAC TCAC for projects who already have HCD funding?
No, that's actually something entirely separate. So folks may be aware that there's a draft proposal out there for, as you said, right, some money to flow through HCD that would allow us to substitute in HCD funds for 4% tax credit applicants who have been applying and have not been able to win 4% tax credits and bond awards. And we're calling that MDAP, the Multifamily Development Acceleration Program. And that is operating on a parallel, super fast timeline with AB 434 implementation. So we'll be coming out, if everything goes smoothly in the legislative process, we'll be coming out with some kind of application for those funds in midsummer.
Great. Will you coordinate the timing of the supernovas with TCAC CIDLAC to allow projects that receive an HCD award to immediately move into an application for tax credits? Will there be an effort to integrate even further with TCAC and CIDLAC?
On the first question, yes, definitely. One of the reasons that we don't have a pinned down NOFA schedule is that we want to have those conversations with CIDLAC and TCAC and make sure that you can do that 1-2 process for projects that do want to go in for tax credits. On the second question, I think that's a little bit to be determined. I mean, folks may know that there's some advocacy and efforts around legislation to more fully line up the activities of HCD and CIDLAC and TCAC. I think what we can say on our side as staff is that we are working hard to collaborate more, to talk more, and to be more transparent and involved with our partners at the other housing finance agencies. And so in terms of things like making sure that the MHP guidelines really reflect what's in TCAC regs is one example where we're having conversations to make sure that the changes that we're making are also elements that they're keeping, right? So this is another one of those things, just like streamlining, where it's going to be kind of an ongoing effort, and we're in it.
Great, thank you. We still have about 2 more questions, so if anyone else has anything, please feel free to drop it in the Q&A. Can you further re-clarify about TOD funds running out and whether that means no TOD funding in Supernova and TOD funding becoming available again in 2022?
Yeah, so TOD it's a 3-cycle program, right? And then the funds, Jennifer, where do the funds revert to after the 3rd cycle?
Well, so TOD, we had resources available for TOD in Prop 1. We accelerated those funds and had just 1 funding round, which closed last fall, I think, and we made awards earlier this year that allocated 100% of the available funds under Prop 1 for TOD. So without some sort of augmentation through another bond, potentially, there is no additional money available under the TOD program to be able to kind of roll into a supernova. So the supernova would not include TOD funds at this point, but we will be looking at our TOD guidelines and getting those guidelines in a place where they're aligned with MHP and all of the other programs and meet the requirements of AB 434 in the event additional funds do become available under that program.
Great, thank you. Any thought to allow projects to be held over from NOFA to NOFA in some type of wait list rather than a do-over each time?
Interesting question.
I think that's a good question. What we're contemplating is more the ability to go in and resubmit a slightly modified application. I think the chances that we would have identical scoring criteria and guidelines from one NOFA to the next is low. So being able to resubmit exactly the same application without any changes to the project or without any tweaks seems a little bit low to me.
But I would just mention too that some of you may be familiar with MHP round 1 to round 2, we did allow that. We allowed folks to basically resubmit their round one application with any changes that were necessary so that the core document was pretty much the same. I think historically we have been making pretty significant changes to our application documents from round to round to round, right? Which has made that kind of resubmittal of an application infeasible. But I think as we really get into AB 434, we do want to look at how we can kind of have more consistency from year to year so that the majority of the application documents can be quickly updated and resubmitted. I think there's also an effort to look at how we can modify our application to better align with TCAC and CIDLAC so that you have one core application that can be used across agencies. So there's multiple things going on, but yes, there is a goal to get to that place eventually, for sure.
Great, thank you. And then we have a question here. How can stakeholders inform the MDAP criteria?
So that program, so that's the backlog funding, just to reiterate. So that's the 1.75 billion that was proposed in the governor's May revise to really kind of tackle the issue of this multi-billion-dollar backlog of HCD funded projects that are kind of sitting in the CIDLAC 4% tax credit queue, right? So we are at this point looking into in the initial stages of designing that program for implementation. There will likely be some sort of level of prioritization, kind of getting those projects that have been stuck in the pipeline kind of unstuck, right? Who's applied but been unsuccessful and keeps applying over and over and over again. So more information on that to come. We will be having an initial outreach to project sponsors that are kind of in that pipeline, probably coming out shortly after we get final word on where things are going to land in the state budget. So.
Great. And for now, this is the last question in the Q&A box. So if anyone has additional questions, we do still have about 12 more minutes. How much will be available under the accelerator program? NOFA's out this summer. Also, can we see the last slide again?
So right now, as Jennifer mentioned, the proposal is for 1.75 billion for that MDAP program. And then let me see if I can figure out how to show you that last slide.
Great. And then in the chat, Randy is asking for an update on accessible housing grant programs and how to apply.
So I think this is the one that you were referring to, is that right?
I believe so. I think that was the last slide. Mm-hmm.
I just want to note on this slide too that this is reflective only of funds awarded. So like you'll see CERNA there, we had 282 million, 103 million was awarded, but this doesn't reflect the NOFA that's currently open for 86 million. So we have open NOFAs for CERNA, we have an open NOFA for VIP as well, and an open NOFA for IIG. So those bars will definitely move to the right as those awards are being made.
Yeah.
Great. We did get another question. Will the supernova align in any way with the disposition of public land for housing?
Yeah, we're working across the department and working closely with the housing policy development team on that. So it's on our radar and conversations are occurring.
Great. And then if anyone had an answer on any accessible housing programs that people could apply to, does anybody on the panel have any in mind?
So that sounded like it was for a grant, and is that a grant for an individual perhaps? I'm not We don't specifically have funds directly available as a grant for accessibility improvements, but a lot of localities have those funds potentially available.
Great. I'll let you know if there's a response. Let's see. Any updates on consideration to fund more in CERNA based on apps received?
So we're working through that right now. The team is working pretty much around the clock to try and get through the applications that were submitted. It looks good. We don't have a final kind of. I wish I could announce something as part of this, but we're not there yet. But we're just trying to figure out what that final number will be based on threshold reviews and appeals that have come in. For those of you that are on the line and are waiting for some sort of information from the team will be reaching out to folks probably in the next 2 days or so to let you know kind of the status. But I think it's all signs are looking good at this point, and we're working really hard to try and get the award letters out to folks that are wanting to apply for 9% credits on July 1st. So keep your fingers crossed for us.
And just to be clear, I think maybe this was clear, but that all signs are looking good means all signs point to we will be able to forward fund out of future pots of money in order to provide funding to all of the qualified applicants who came in this round for CERNA. So we wouldn't be relying exclusively on the folks who came in very first in that over-the-counter process.
Great. So looks like we still have about 8 minutes. I don't see any more questions yet, but we'll just give folks a little bit of time if there's anything more that anyone would like to ask.
Well, let me say just two things here, which is, first of all, thank you for Jennifer and Hector and Nur for joining me. This is my 3rd month at HCD. And so I appreciate the backup from my colleagues who have a depth of experience with us. And I also want to make sure to introduce Gina Ferguson, who is in this session, I believe, as an audience member because we couldn't get her promoted to a panelist. But for folks who are anticipating being more involved with the AB 434 implementation and the MHP guidelines, we have a leadership team that is really awesome. We have Laura Bateman, the longtime section chief over MHP, and Gina Ferguson, who has graced HCD by coming over from CIDLAC and TCAC, where she's been for a long time. So Gina and Laura are your go-tos on AB 434 moving forward.
Great. Yep. And Gina did acknowledge herself in the chat, so feel free to say hi to her there. Jessica says, congrats. That's a lot of knowledge in 3 months, Sasha. Question, can you share with us how you define success in the implementation of AB 434?
That's an excellent question, and one that I've been trying to encapsulate in an elevator speech, which is never my strength. So success in the AB 434 implementation process looks like clarity and minimum effort on the side of developer applicants so that it is obvious what you can apply for, when you should apply for it, and that you can get the maximum bang for your buck out of our funding programs in a short and easy process, right? That is predictable, that is annual, and that lines up with CIDLAC and TCAC. Success from our side looks like workflow within and between teams is much easier and more manageable because we have that consolidated process and we have people basically working on all multifamily programs together with better structures and processes in place for getting the standard agreement out the door, et cetera. So I think it's kind of streamlining is such a vague word, right? But it's like making everybody's life easier, less brain damage, less time.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, I think the two words that really resonate with me in terms of what we hope to achieve out of AB 434, the first would be predictability, right? Like knowing when a NOFA is coming out, right? Being able to plan ahead, meeting our time commitments to you all, right? If we say we're going to make an award by such and such a date, that we're meeting those, and those are predictable and knowable kind of things that you can kind of plug into your planning. The other is really accountability, and I think that accountability is on both sides, right? I think accountability from our perspective in terms of just knowing, having things move at a very accelerated pace, right? So that we're getting those funds out to you as soon as we can. So accountability through the development of our standard agreements, through the development of our loan docs or our loan closing processes, right? Accountability to you all and how we're doing our work, and then accountability from your side in terms of being open and communicating with us, right? In terms of any changes to the project, making sure that these projects are moving forward. And that if something does get stuck, right, for one reason or another, like having those conversations about, can we think about like disencumbering funds, right? And moving funds into projects that can move forward. So I think there's going to be an accountability piece on both ends as well.
That's great. It looks like Gina was able to join us. And it looks like,
great to be here.
hey, Gina. We will be wrapping up in the next minute or so we can have the next session start right at 1 o'clock. Thank you to Lisa Hershey in Housing California for having us here. And thank you to the Pro Bono American Sign Language folks for providing their services today. And also thank you to our tech team, Gavin and Sarah, to help us along. So yeah, with that, any closing remarks?
I just want to thank everyone for their participation. Some really good questions. I think some questions that we definitely need to dig a little deeper on. So encourage folks to continue to stay engaged in this AB 434 process, right? Please, please, please plan to attend one of those sessions and be on the lookout, because there will be additional public participation opportunities as we continue to update the guidelines of the corresponding programs, right, that are also subject to AB 434. So
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Have a good day.
thanks.